All right, we're recording.
Oh, good day, everyone. My name is Gary Meadows. I'm a
Hey, Gary.
Client solutions consultant with Proactive Solutions. And today we're going to be discussing, this is a CMMC Readiness workshop. We're going to be talking about why most assessments fail before they even get started. Just a couple housekeeping note or the agenda. We're going to talk to the introductions. We're going to walk through what the CMMC model looks like and how the assessment process goes, the different phases of that. And then we're going to walk through real quickly a readiness workbook that we've put together here at Proactive that we'll send it to you after this webinar, and you'll be able to use that in your company to gauge your readiness after having gone through our workshop here. And it has some guidance as to how you can go about determining whether your organization is ready to contact an outside organization, a C3 PAO, to begin your assessment process. And then we'll walk through some of the common gaps and lessons learned, our best practices and tips. We have a guest speaker here. We'll talk about that in a second, and they'll be covering most of that, some bits and pieces from that section. And then we'll wrap up with an offering from Proactive, our readiness engagement model, for how we can help you determine whether you're ready or not. And then we'll open it up to questions and answers. All right. Moving on right along. As I said, my name is Gary Meadows. I am a client solutions consultant here with Proactive Solutions. We're a 30-year-old woman-owned MSP and value-added reseller, and IVR, our IT managed services company out of Kansas City, Missouri, headquartered there, but we have operations all over the United States. I am a CMMC registered practitioner as determined by the Cyber Advisory Board and a CCP candidate, having passed my exam and waiting on my Tier 3 suitability determination. Today with us, we have special guest Mike Crandall. He's the Digital Beachhead CEO and founder. Digital Beachhead is a Colorado Springs-based C3 PAO certified third-party assessor organization. Hi, Mike.
Hello, Gary. Yes, as a 3CPAO, we are the droids you're looking for.
Right on. They are definitely that. Okay, just dive right into it then. Most of you here should be familiar with CMMC, but if you're not, if you're watching us on YouTube after the fact, the CMMC is a cybersecurity maturity model certification. It was created by the DoD in response to a lot of our stuff getting leaked out there to adversarial entities around the globe. We've seen for the last 10, 15 years, our defense industrial base and our military and our government being the targets of attacks from around the world. And we've seen a lot of our advanced technology fall into the hands of our adversaries to the point where they've been cloning our technology and releasing it before we even get it out the door. So the CMMC model was created as a way to help the defense industrial base shore up their cybersecurity practices and help protect the information that they are being entrusted with from the Department of Defense or Department of War. And you can see here in this in the diagram, it's divided into 3 levels. It's a maturity model, and so the levels of maturity increase as you go from the bottom to the top, and that determines the level of rigor that a defense industrial based company would need to adhere to in order to receive and protect the information that the government entrusts them with. So starting at level 1, we look at federal contract information, who the details around the contract, The government is procuring something from a company, and they don't need the adversaries to know which companies they're procuring from, how the invoices process works, how the buying process works, who the contracting officers are, etc., because that is open source intelligence that allows those adversaries to then target those participants, and the less information they have, the better. And so we see the 15 controls defined by the Federal Acquisition Regulations as to what they need to, the controls that they need to comply with in order to protect the federal contract information. And then as you move up the levels, level 2 is where we get into controlled unclassified information. And there's more stringent requirements and controls that need to be applied at that level in order to protect the CUI, controlled unclassified information. There are 110 controls, and as we dive into, we'll discuss the anatomy of a control, and you can see within those 110 controls, there is actually 320 different assessment objectives that must be met. And so at level 2, you have, there's 2 actual types of level 2. Level 2 self-assessed, and then level 2 certified. And level 2 certified means that you need to have a C3PAO, such as Digital Beachhead or some of the many others that are out there, come in and do an assessment of your organization's security posture as it pertains to those 110 controls out of the NIST 800-171. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's a governing body that puts out these documents, special publications, and NIST 800-171 is the special publication for protecting controlled unclassified information in non-federal systems. And then level 3 would be the most stringent level of the CMMC model, and that is where we then add the requirements from NIST 800-172, and that assessment actually gets performed by the DBCAC, and they will come in and do the assessment, and that is typically for, we're going to see that on larger nuclear programs, weapons grade programs, etc., where the DBCAC feels that there needs to be substantially more controls put into place than what is at level 2, a bit more stringent. Anything to add to that, Mike, before I move on?
No, absolutely right. And for level 2 in the first year, they're going to allow that self-assessment, but it's still up to the program office. So they may require you to get a 3CPO. So no time like the now to get ready.
Absolutely. And we can discuss a little bit later on the availability and the scheduling capability or the scheduling impacts for when and how you should be determining or going and getting on the books for those C3PAOs.
Excellent. Yeah, I can give you the numbers.
Right on. I'm sure you can. You see them all the time. All right. So we talked so NIST 800-171, as we say it, that's where the document, the special publication that says you must comply with all 110 controls in this document. Well, that is broken up into 14 different domains. And you can see on the chart the 14 different domains. The green boxes are the level 1. They have requirements for level 1, and then all 14 have requirements for level 2. And so we'll send this out to you guys afterwards. But if you click on, for example, access control, and I may have to share my screen here for you to see it. Can you see the website?
Yep.
All right. So CyberAssist is a nonprofit that has a lot of good materials around CMMC. But let's look at level 2, and we'll just click through to access control here. And you can see a lot of information specific to this control. Now, this control is access control level 2, 3.1.1, and it's called authorized access control. And then the verbiage for it is to limit information system access to authorized users, processes acting on behalf of authorized users, or devices. And so there's a link to the assessment guide. There's a link to how to configure those within Microsoft Entra, and then some additional resources from NIST as to identity proofing and authentication of users, for example. So each one of those, did I lose my presentation? Let's go back here. Back into Teams. Nope, that was clumsy.
You're back at the first. There you go.
There we go. All right, so each one of those will have every single control that applies to that domain, level 1, level 2, and level 3. And then they have some resources that you can use, and they're free resources. But again, a lot of this is very complicated. But let's take a look at that access control a little bit further. And is my screen still sharing? Can you see?
I see the presentation.
You don't see the PDF. Okay.
Nope.
Let's do this again. And switch to the PDF.
There you go.
Now we got the PDF. So this is what I'm showing is the level 2 assessment guide. And this is from the Cyber Advisory Board. And it says, this is how an assessor, with the document that assessors use when they come in to assess your organization. This is the items that they would be assessing each control under. And so, again, it's access control level 2, 3.1.1, and we're talking authorized access control for CUI data. We've already said what the control is supposed to do, but what I wanted to point out here was there are 6 different assessment objectives that apply to this control. And the reason that's important is because if you remember in the beginning, I say there are 110 controls from NIST 800-171, but there's 320 assessment objectives. And so this one has 6. And so we'll break this down a little bit because you need to determine if your users are identified, authorized users, authorized being they have the authorization to access CUI data, and that the processes that are acting on behalf of authorized users are identified. And the same with the devices. Now, the first 3 are talking about that we've identified everything that's allowed access to the CUI, users, processes, and devices. And when you think processes, think a backup scripting process or some other type of software or tool that is doing a function on the network that allows it to store, process, or transmit CUI on behalf of an authorized user. And the same with devices. And so this is broken down by, we've identified who they are, which means you need a list somewhere, whether that's a authorized users list or some spreadsheet that says these users have been authorized. And then the final 3 control is that you're actually limiting the access. You didn't just identify them, you are actually limiting the access to those authorized users, processes, and devices. And so this goes into, we look down here further, and I'm pointing this out so you can understand how to use the assessment guide for your own self-assessments as well. It says these are the 3 methods that a assessor would use to determine whether you're doing this appropriately or not. They can examine your artifacts, such as your access control policy, procedures and documents for your account management, system audit logs and records, etc. They can interview your personnel, or they can test your procedures and mechanisms for how you address account management. Anything you want to add to this piece real quick, Mike, before we jump on?
No, I appreciate you stressing the objective level. Many people, and when we get into our tips and what we're finding, they don't understand the 320 objectives. So pay close attention to the objectives.
Right on. Okay, let's go here. Let me try to. This is my first time running this, so I should have practiced the switching back and forth of the sharing here a little bit better. Okay, we want to resume.
Yep, there you go.
All right. Okay, and so you can, this workshop is this presentation is intended to show you tools and resources that you can use on your own, and how the assessors are going to look at your environment and your processes and policies and procedures. Okay, so the assessment process flow starts at the top there by identifying the required level that you're going to need. And you do this by going back and looking at your contracts. Your contract will specifically call out, or should a bid that you're working towards, or your contract will call out what DFARS and or FAR requirements you will have to comply with. And as we have started to see recently, it'll also start calling out specific CMMC levels. As of November 10th, it'll call out a specific CMMC level. And you can see the estimates there on the right-hand side as to the percentages. I think we've started to see, these were the original percentages from mid last year. I think we've started to see these shift a bit. Mike, can you tell us where you see us landing now?
Yeah, I see that this was kind of based on what subcontractors would flow down plus the original prime contractors. And I'm beginning to see more and more level 2. And that's just the contractors, kind of taking the easy route. Instead of saying, for sure, you're never going to get CUI, so we'll call you level 1 and self-assess. They're saying, what if one day we want to send you CUI, so why don't we just get you into level 2 right from the get-go?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of primes require that regardless of what the contract says at that moment. And it's a risk mitigation factor for them.
Exactly.
So we're going to identify what level is required. Then we're going to determine the scope. Then we're going to do a self-assessment of our own. So if I'm the company that needs to get certified, I want to start with my own self-assessment, because I don't want to go spend a lot of money to have a third party come in and start working only to tell me that I'm not ready. So I want to determine how ready I am by reviewing my own policies, procedures, tools, technology, and people ahead of time. And so we perform the assessment based on what the required level is. Maybe that's a self-assessment. Maybe we require to have a C3PAO come in and assess us, or we're at level 3 and we need DIBCAC to come in. Then those assessment results are uploaded into SPRS or eMASS, depending upon what level it is. But that's not the scope of this discussion. And then the organization seeking certification or assessment, that affirming official, the executive within their organization that's affirming the results, has an annual affirmation that they need to do after that initial assessment. All right, so moving along, this is we're getting into the meat of what we wanted to talk about. This is the assessment process, the C3PAO's assessment process. So this is what Mike and his team at Digital Beachhead would do when they come in to assess you. This is the process they follow. And understand that this is not random or arbitrary, and it should not differ between different C3PAOs. It is clearly called out. There's an assessment process that's called out by the Cyber Advisory Board, and there's a flow that has to happen here. And so starting at the top, we do our preliminary proceedings, which is the initial request. We confirm that the cage codes, which cage codes will for that company will be involved in the assessment. We frame up the assessment, identify conflicts of interest potentially, and then we move on to the pre-assessment phase. And that's where we're going to focus the bulk of our discussion today, is on that pre-assessment portion, because the whole topic of this is why most CMMC assessments fail before they start. And this is where we find out that you're going to fail before we can even get started. And so phase one is where the pre-assessment. Phase two is where they actually dive into your evidence and start comparing your system security plan against the NIST 800-171, those 110 controls, and more importantly, the 320 assessment objectives. And then assuming that all lines up, maybe there's a few things that are on a plan of action and milestones that weren't necessarily tidy right then, but can be corrected. You'll go into phase three, and where you'll either get your certification if you have no outstanding items, or if you do have outstanding items, you'll receive a conditional certification. And then if you receive that conditional certification, you'll have 180 days to complete phase four, to complete those, tidy up those items, and then they'll come back and complete it as a phase four. And I was just going to say, Mike, did I frame that correctly?
Yep. And pre-phase one, we do a scoping call, so we try to, like you said, we frame the assessment. So we want to be as prepared as possible. Phase one, though, you're in it. It's the actual assessment, right? So your previous slides where you talked about you doing a good self-assessment and knowing you're ready, you want to do that before you get to phase one. Some people read pre-assessment and assume, oh, this is just us getting ready for the assessment. It's actually a part of the formal assessment process.
Right. And from the moment you contact that C3PAO, you're kind of in, once you get, you're in the process, essentially.
When you're in phase one, we have to put something in eMASS. We have to take over the assessment and put something in eMASS. So you don't want to have any failure or, we're not moving forward kind of thing at phase one. So be ready.
And we're going to call that out right here. So again, this is a more detailed look at those four phases. I'm going to focus on phase one for this discussion. And I've highlighted a couple things in phase one that are relevant to this topic. Okay. The first thing they're going to want to do, the assessors are going to want to do, is see your system security plan, because that is going to be the bulk of where everything should be stored, as far as we have a policy for access control. We have a policy for our external boundaries and connections. We have policies for who can do what on our network and who has access to this information, and how do we control it. All of that goes into the system security plan. They're going to confirm that you have evidence which lines up with those 110 controls. They're not necessarily in phase one going to dive into, and we'll get into what evidence looks like and sufficiency and adequacy, which is their measure of whether or not your evidence makes sense. But at this point, they're just confirming whether or not you actually have some evidence that they're going to need. And if you don't, they look at your system security plan, or they look at your availability of evidence, and it is not up to par, that is where, if you look down there, the determination of whether or not they're ready for an assessment is pretty much the next thing. That's a go or no go decision, is it not, Mike?
Yeah. At phase one, we have to make that determine, and this is why I say it's real. And that goes into eMASS. So if we feel you do not have enough evidence to move forward into the phase two, we have to put that into eMASS saying, you're not prepared for phase two.
Yep. And so if you look down there in the phase 1 column, the second to last item is upload the pre-assessment form into eMASS. And so you're already at that point, we're telling the government's being told that you were not ready.
Right.
Which is horrible if you're in the middle of a bid or up for renewal on an existing contract, or if you had I would say if you had a self-assessment score that
of 110, yeah,
of 110, and you were told you had to go get C3PAO assessed, and now they come back and say you're not ready to get into phase 2. Somebody might get their eyebrows raised and decide to come and look a little bit closer at your operations. So this is why the importance of a pre-assessment or a readiness prior to contacting a C3PO is critical.
Correct.
All right. So we talked about evidence, and this is things that Mike and team are going to be looking at before, right there in phase 1. Do you have some evidence, or do you have some evidence that matches the areas that they're going to be looking at? And so let's talk a little bit about that. So a policy, we look at policies, procedures, and we said there was 14 domains that we're looking at. So we're going to recommend that you have a policy and a procedure for each one of those domains. Yep. And that's going to say what you're doing and then how you do it. So a policy is just saying we will implement controls to restrict access to authorized users, as an example. And then the procedure will state how that policy will be implemented and maintained. And then we will attach evidence, or we will find and associate, and usually all of the best practice, in my opinion, is to link all of this in the SSP so that it's very clearly findable by that assessor. The assessor looks and they say, we have a policy, it's linked to here. They have a procedure that says they do this, and then they have evidence that aligns with those assessment objectives.
Absolutely.
And so then they have supporting documents, right? These are the things that Mike's team would likely ask for. Anything stand out to you here, Mike?
A lot of the folks misunderstand sometimes the media posting plan, because they're like, we'll never post CUI, or we have no external resources. And then they forget, oh, we post to LinkedIn, we post to Instagram, we have a Facebook page, we have a website. And it's like, that's what you have to have a rule set. How do you do it? Who looks at it? Who approves it? So that's a gap that a lot of companies don't even, pull into their mind of something that they need to be doing.
Yeah. And what I like to say is the assessment guide, the NIST documentation, they clearly spell out everything that you have to touch and tackle. And a lot of companies we see go, that doesn't apply to me, but it does. Right. Even if you think you're not doing it, you have to look at it, and you have to have an answer for it when the assessors come in.
To that example, Gary, if you don't post and you have no social media and you have no website, you can say, we don't do this by policy.
Right. But if something was to happen and one of your employees accidentally posted something, right, you have to have a procedure or a policy that says, here's how we're going to address it.
Correct.
Sometimes that's just disciplinary action, right? Some remedial training, etc.
Exactly.
All right, Tommy, thank you for joining. All right. At Proactive, we've put together a readiness workbook, which you can use in your organization to help you determine how close you are to being ready to call someone like Mike's organization. And I like this statement: a good SSP tells your story, and the evidence proves that your story is true. So I'm going to show you that real quick. I'm going to share our readiness workbook. Let me know. Are we good to go?
Yep, I can see it.
Oh, perfect. All right. So we put this together as just a simple way of a simple kind of checklist that shows you, can give you an idea and give your leadership an idea. Let's say you're the security guy and you're supposed, or girl, and you're supposed to do this, tell us and get us ready. This will give you a good idea of how ready you are. So just some initial information from your organization, your cage codes. Obviously, you need to have one of those, or you're not even going to be starting this process. Key systems or enclaves, right? And so I've seen several times companies that say they need to get certified, and they can't even articulate what systems throughout their organization would be in scope. So just thinking through that ahead of time is really the starting block, if you will. A couple of other key things I wanted to point out in this, and we'll send this to everyone on the call after, but the lead assessor awareness. Does your internal staff understand what that lead assessor's role is? That they're not coming in and giving you guidance on how to fix things. If you're in an assessment, you are either in a met or not met condition, or not applicable, rare, a met or not met condition. You're go or no go, basically. And that lead assessor is not necessarily, I don't want to say they're your enemy or adversarial, but they're not your friend at that point. And so you need to have your people prepared to understand what that lead assessor's role is and how to answer the questions appropriately so that the assessor is confident that they know what they're doing with regards to the topic that's being discussed, and the evidence can clearly back that up. So then we get into the scope and the evidence preparation. We're going to want your SSP. It's got to be current. It's got to be approved by management. It can't be a draft, right? It says draft all over. That's not acceptable typically. We want your network diagrams and flows. Have you looked at all the systems that handle CUI and FCI and you've documented them? Do you have policies for all 14 of those domains as we discussed? And then do you have evidence that maps to each one of those practices? Then we look at adequacy and sufficiency, right? So adequacy is the evidence the right type? And then sufficiency, is there enough evidence across all your assets so that the assessor is able to say, yes, they've shown us both the right evidence and sufficient evidence. Mike, you want to say anything there about adequacy and sufficiency? Because I know sometimes people mix that up a little bit.
Yeah, so adequacy is saying you have evidence that appears to cover it. In this case, I like to jokingly say you have two-factor authentication, and you adequately say one's a physical and one's a logical. Then we determine sufficiency, and you say, well, my physical is my wife said hello to me in the morning, therefore that's a physical. And I'm like, that's not really sufficient. That was adequate to say you had two-factor, but it didn't meet the sufficiency standard. Another example, a real example would be you say you have two-factor turned on, and then we find out you have 15 computers you neglected to do it to. So you
or the admin account. You do it for all accounts except the admin accounts.
Exactly.
That's another
so
one
you have that adequate, but you weren't sufficient. You didn't cover all the bases, you know?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Right on. And so then, as I mentioned, when the assessor's coming in, you're getting a met or a not met. There's no scoring. But for this simplicity and in helping us determine how ready you are to call an assessor or to schedule an assessment, we put a 0 to 3 score across all 14 domains. And so you're going to want to go to the assessment guide, and then you're going to want to follow the assessment guide across all 14 of the domains and give yourself a critical evaluation of whether or not you have the policies, the procedures, and the evidence to support an assessor coming in and look at it. And then you're going to want to identify the owner for each of those domains as well, because they're going to need to be aware and trained on what the assessors are looking for, how to answer their questions appropriately, and how to defend your controls, basically. Defend your environment and say, we are doing what we're supposed to be doing. And so then once you get those scored, we have our scoring criteria here, and then we have a pre-assessment decision matrix. And what this does is basically says you are either 6 months to 90 days away from needing, from calling a C3PAO, or if you're really good to go, let's go ahead and with formal readiness review and prepare a formal assessment plan with a C3PAO. So that's just a quick worksheet that we put together so that you guys can do your own self-assessment and to figure out how close you are to getting ready to call a C3PAO. And I'm just jumping back into the presentation here. It didn't give me the resume button this time. That was weird. Odd. Okay. So this section, I'm going to lean heavily on Mike because this is going to be what he's seen in the field.
Yeah.
Right. So what we say is best practices. I'm going to start by saying you're going to want to have not, the wolf in the hen house, the fox in the hen house.
Yep.
You don't want the people who are doing your security controls and saying that you're ready to actually be the one to say you're ready to go forward. You want to have a neutral team to review objectively your internal controls. And so you can get a registered practitioner like myself or others that are out there to come in and take a look at your evidence and your SSP and your CUI flows and help you determine that. You can do it yourself, but you want to have a separate team that's not the ones implementing the controls or the ones that's responsible for the assessment. Then you're going to want to actually mirror the assessment process. You want to simulate what they're looking for. You go to the assessment guide and you want to walk through all 320 assessment objectives. So at a minimum, you've at least looked at them and you know that they're there. I've seen where people have actually totally skipped domains and were surprised that that's something that they have to do. You're going to want to, jump in at any time, Mike. You're going to want to engage your leadership early, right? So we talked about the affirming official, and that's a concept that in the CMMC environment says a senior leader in your organization must put their name on the line, and that comes with potential civil and criminal liabilities if they are found to be fraudulently signing their name saying it's been done. And we're seeing a huge amount of those cases come out where the defense, the Department of Justice is going after companies that have fraudulently stated that they were doing these procedures and practices. And so the leadership needs to understand what they are attesting to and what their signatures represent. And then finally, you're going to want to cross-check all your documentation. Mike, I've heard you say this at some of your speaking events, right? You don't want to have a policy that says we have a 15-minute session lock, and then the assessor comes in and finds out that, they're 30-minute session locks or something along those lines. Anything else around best practices for what they do to prepare to come to see you guys?
Yeah, I would definitely say making sure you have a neutral view. If you can't hire an outside source, try to have someone who doesn't necessarily understand the controls ask you the questions about the controls. So then you have to learn how to explain it. The cap is exactly right. Do the phase one, say, do I have the paperwork? The cross-checking. I like to call it the slide to the right. Do I state it in my SSP? Do I have a policy that says the same thing? Do I have an implementation that does and states that I'm implementing it the exact same way I said in the policy in the SSP? And then, as you said, then is there that nice screenshot piece of evidence? So with your 15 minutes, we shall do it in 15 minutes. Policy says I'll do it in 15 minutes. The implementation says I go here, check this box, type in 15 minutes or however you get to that 15-minute time frame. And then there's a screenshot that shows that configuration at 15 minutes.
Absolutely.
So that if you can do that for all 320 objectives, you're ready.
You're rock solid. You're rock solid then, right? Because then your assessor is able to come in, look at your SSP, and it's literally like a choose your own adventure book almost, right? Turn to page 33. Turn to page 33, and it says exactly what I think it's supposed to say on page 33. There's no surprises to an extent.
We like to say a happy assessor is the one you want, right? That's a good assessor.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. So common gaps and lessons learned. This is Mike's domain right here, and I'll let you go ahead and take it from here, Mike. I'm going to shut up for a minute.
So under access controls, unclear mapping of user privileges and or shared accounts. If you looked at the second objectives in 311, it is service accounts. So what service accounts? Do you have backup admins? Do you have something that's running your audit logs? Those all have to be listed and you have to understand what they are. Do you have shared admin counts locally? That's not necessarily allowed. You have to be able to identify who logged in. So if it's administrator for all your locals, that's a big gap a lot of folks are coming up with. The training records, the fact that they're inconsistent, outdated, and also they have to be specific. You need insider threat. You need to make sure you're training on CUI, and then you have to identify, which could be general cybersecurity issues, but make sure everyone is getting trained on that. But also that your administrators are getting some sort of privileged access training, a step beyond. So a lot of folks think I have my death by PowerPoint, and we say, don't click on phishing emails, and you do it once a year, and they're like, I got training. It's like, no, there's 3 individual specific areas. That general training, great, you covered it, your privileged users, and then that insider threat. But in that death by PowerPoint, if you don't include, hey, this is how we protect CUI, there's no CUI specifics, it needs to include that too. So the audit and accountability, the missing seam coverage or centralized logging, it is not required per se, but if you have no centralized logging, you have to have strong policy to show how you're checking all of the logs. So if you have 100 workstations and you have no seam, do you have a policy that you're checking all 100 workstations on the weekly, on the monthly, or however you define it? So logging in general is, having a solid policy to be reviewing the logs. Config management. This one gets tough because people think, well, I'm not making any major changes. But a change is a change, so you have to have some sort of config management process. And again, if you go through the objectives, there is a lot of minutia detail that you need to be looking for with each change. So there needs to be a security review. Does it affect physical access controls? Does it affect logical access controls? So it's not as simple as, I would like to make a change. Hey, Gary, can I make the change? You're like, boom, boom, finger guns, make the change. And we had a change management process. We have to show the assessors we're covering all of those objectives and answering all of those questions as part of your change management. So that one's we see missing a lot. INA, identification and authentication. The MFA, again, going into the objective level, it talks about privileged users both locally and on the network. So if you have a standalone workstation or you allow local login, even at the administrator level, you have a local administrator, it needs to be 2FA. So how do you do that? A lot of people are missing that as part of the overall look, right? And then incident response, The biggest lesson there is they don't do the tabletops. They're not getting it tested. And you have to show you've done some sort of testing in tabletop. Make sure that your tabletop isn't, again, Gary and I sit around a table and I go, Gary, we've been ransomware. And you're like, pay the ransom. Great. We've tested our tabletop. You should have notes. You should have meeting minutes. You should have some discussion. You should show that it was a meaningful test, if you will. And then maintenance. This one's difficult because a lot of people are relying on maintenance thinking, well, I do patch maintenance. But the control, the cap and everything, the CAG, the assessment guide, specifically points out this is not meant to be patch maintenance. This is meant to be maintenance. And so some of us with our throwaway laptops now, we don't take the covers off. We're not dusting them. We're not doing those kind of things. So you have to be very explicit in what maintenance you do, if any. And if you're not doing a lot of maintenance, we will tell our clients, if you have canned air and you put it on a shelf and you say once a month, I make sure I dust my router out and I tell users if they feel their computer's dusty to come over and sign out a canned air and dust your computer. That's your maintenance. Write it down. That's your maintenance plan. It's as simple as that. But you have to have something. And these are kind of the areas we miss.
I would just add to that maintenance one is if I have, for example, a CNC machine that has to be maintained by a third party,
yep.
When that third party comes in to maintain that maintenance session has to be documented that person touched that machine.
Absolutely. And those are the ones that, the clear and obvious, I should have a maintenance plan because we need maintenance. My example was the, 2 or 3 person shop and they're doing, other kinds of government work. And they're like, all I have is my laptop. What my maintenance plan? Well, you need something. It could be canned air.
Agreed.
Media protection, USBs, big killer. They have to be labeled. You have to authorize them. You have to restrict to only those USBs you allow. So the easy answer, of course, is no USBs anywhere. But then you get companies who are like, we can't do that. So if you're going to use USBs, you have to be very strict. Physical protection, we often joke this is the easiest one to fail during the assessment. If I show up to do your physical protection controls and you're like, come on in, have a cup of coffee. Okay, I didn't sign in. You're already missing your physical control barrier of having a guest sign in and be escorted and those kind of things. But when you're thinking physical security, also think about your server rooms, your different areas within your facility. Personnel security, background checks. They don't tell you, there's no specific you must, but you must do something. So it's as simple as, hey, I've got, this website that I pay my $10 a month and I can do a basic criminal background check on someone. Great. If it's, I do my I-9 check and I check them on the, government websites to make sure they're US citizens. Great. But you have to document it and then do it for all of your users. Risk assessment. This is actually, going down and sitting with your team, including the executives, and say, what are our risks? And then putting that into the whole idea of then what do we do if they happen? What do we have in place? A lot of people don't really get into that risk assessment enough. They don't really discuss risk. The security assessment, the vulnerability scans, a lot of companies aren't doing vulnerability scans on the regular. So it's determining that you are doing that. Going back to that standalone environment, if you have 100 computers and they're not all networked together, are you going to run a vulnerability scan individually on 100 computer systems? So, these are the things to take into mind. The systems and communications protections. How are you documenting your data flow? What is your documented data flow? Your ACLs, access control lists. So this is really thinking about your router switches hubs. This is thinking about your individual firewalls on the endpoints. And again, it's all about that documentation. Document. And then finally, system information integrity. The validation, corrective actions. What are you doing? And that goes back into config management, right? Oh, I found a vulnerability, so I need to do something to mitigate my vulnerability. Well, before you do that, you should run your config management program, get it approved, do all the checkboxes. So if you start looking at it as a whole, they all kind of tie in together and have to show it as an overall view of what you're doing.
And I think that's a big one too, that again, they do tie back together, but we've seen where a company has, they did their scans in February and they identified a bunch of vulnerabilities. You come back in March and the same vulnerabilities are still identified. This goes back to your risk assessment. There's so many different things that we have to do in order to protect this information that the risk assessment needs to be identifying the risk and then prioritizing the risk, because you have to be able to, like with your vulnerabilities, you can't patch everything immediately necessarily. Some things are more critical than others. And so therefore, show that you're remediating in some way, shape, or form according to some type of process.
Well, and that goes back into the objective level, Gary. One of the objective levels does say, what's your timeline for remediation on critical? You define it, but usually it's critical, high, medium, low, and you can say 2 days, 10 days. You define it,
right?
But once you've defined it, to your point,
you better be meeting it.
You got to meet that then that you've defined. So don't say I'm going to do a critical in 2 hours if you're never going to do it in 2 hours. Say I'm going to give myself 8 hours or a day, but then meet it. Exactly right.
Agreed. Well, we're down to about 5 minutes left. So I thank everyone's participation. Absolutely thank Mike Crandall for being here and helping support this discussion. And I just offer, before we get to Q&A, I'm going to offer proactive solutions. We will help you get ready so that you don't go and engage someone like Mike before you're ready. We can come in and do readiness scorecard, look at your evidence and do a gap analysis, and then give you a remediation roadmap that'll help you get shored up and be prepared for when you need to go engage a C3 PAO. And with that, are there any questions or answers? We'll get the answers, but are there any questions?
I was going to say the answer is purple. I always go with purple to start.
C, all the above.
And feel free to reach out. Gary has my email. So if you reach out to Proactive Solutions and it's something that the 3CPO needs to answer, they can always reach out to me, or you can find me at digitalbeachhead.com and we can reach out ourselves, reach out yourselves and I'll answer your questions if I can.
I'll just check the chat and make sure there was nothing put in there. Nope, I do not see anything in there. So I'm going to say with that, I appreciate everyone's time and attention. Mike, thank you very much. Kim, thanks for your help setting this up. And we'll say good day and goodbye.
Thank you all for having me.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.